Part 2 Ending of the Curl, Part 1 down below. To meet Fiona, he guided me around the home. She had on a heavy cable knit sweater that hung below what had to be an amazing rump, black leggings, and strong hiking boots. Grinning, she grasped my hand and guided me over the moors to the seaside cliffs, while Ian stood in front of us. She came to a halt and met my gaze. "I want to show you something. Before I do, you have to promise on all you hold dear to never write or talk about it. It's a secret born here that needs to stay here. It's sacred to the locals and some would be very upset I let an outsider see it. Promise me, Miles." I took a moment to consider it. I promise. I promise on my affection of you and your son, on the deep respect I have for your grandfather, and most of all, on my personal honor." She looked at me sternly and then nodded. She then grinned. "Ian, prepare the rope." I was curious about what was inside his pack, and now I knew. He threw the rope over the edge and fastened it to a tree buffeted by the wind. He smiled at me. "Relax, there's a trail, but it's very steep and you can't afford a misstep. Just hold the rope as we descend and you'll be fine." Fiona went first, and boy, was it difficult. Ian trailed behind while I tried my best to keep up. We dropped perhaps 80 feet and came to a stop on a ledge perhaps 10 feet above the sea. The bay was not calm. Instead, large waves crashed against rocky outcrops. Fiona strolled over to the precipice and appeared to vanish. I moved across and found a virtually undetectable opening that was just big enough to pass through due to the rock's form. She lit 2 torches and smiled when Ian came in. We could use electric torches, but it seemed sacrilege. "Follow me." After walking for around 30 feet, the passageway opened up into a huge cavern. Water falling was audible in the background. Fiona raised the torch above her head, illuminating it briefly before it vanished into complete darkness. "Here we are, the last refuge of Garioch. We're across from the town proper, and this land has been in my family for centuries. No one knows who discovered it, but it became quite handy when Viking raiders appeared. The men would bundle the women and children down the cliff and they would shelter here. Then the men would fight enough of a skirmish to get their attention and disappear into the interior. The raiders usually looted everything worth taking and would fire the village before leaving. Look to your left." Names and dates etched into the rock in layers upon layers could be seen written on the wall. I could not read any of the characters in the oldest document I examined, which was dated 1103. Fiona observed with disdain. "This is a tradition going back, well, you saw the dates. It's the name of every woman and child who lived because they could hide here. There's a spring in the back, a good supply of clean, sweet water, and they would keep enough supplies cached to last for a month. They wouldn't leave until the supplies were gone or the men called them out of hiding. Look here." She guided me to a different section of the wall. Once more, obscured by dates and names. "These are the men and women who died defending their families. Come along." She led me to a back corner where I was astounded by the size of the cavern. There was a stone sofa, and on it were the skeletal remains of a woman, her bones cemented into the spot where they should have been. "This is Agnes of Garioch. She died leading the defense of this place the only time the Vikings discovered it. They always kept sentries and they heard them coming. You saw how narrow the entrance is and they kept them fended off with bows for 5 days before they ran out of arrows. Then they fought their way in, to be met with women and children from 12 on up, armed with claymores, daggers, and spears. 43 women and 19 children fought Viking warriors to a standstill. The men had returned from leading off a portion of the raiding party, came down the cliffs, and attacked them from behind. Not one raider made it out of Scotland. The village seized their 2 ships and the treasure they had plundered before they came here. They took the ships out into the ocean and burned them, and the people threw all the bodies into the bay in front of the cave. If you were to dive it, you could probably find an artifact or 2, but the sea is so treacherous you'd be risking life and limb to do so. The local legend is that Agnes watches over us now, and that the treasure is still intact under the sediment that settled on it, so no one would risk her wrath to steal it. Agnes was the last to die, taking 2 raiders with her. They built this chair and adorned it with necklaces and rings that they had taken from their enemies. When did this occur? As near as we can tell, around 1096. It still has uses. When the Luftwaffe bombed nearby air bases and towns, many sheltered here. Look at this. I saw her lift her torch once more. My grandmother, mother, and brother. I tried to allow the place's history to permeate into my bones as I stood there in amazement. Should these walls have the ability to communicate? Then I saw from the dates and names that they actually did. Ian was standing there, taking in my expression. "Look here." "Ian, don't," she said as he raised his torch. A woman's name was written on a wall, followed by a man's. "What is this?" "When a woman of the area wants to marry or declare her intentions, she write her name and the name of her interest on this wall. The other women would see it and know a man was claimed. I can show you great-grandmothers going back 300 years, all the way down to my grandmother." When I asked Fiona where her name was, she appeared a little uncomfortable. "It's not on there." Maybe that tells me I knew what we had wasn't going to last. If I ever write my name on the wall with the name of my intended, it may as well be written in blood, because it will be for life. Before we went, I spent a few more minutes in awe of the location. Upon our return to the summit, she requested my reassurance that I would protect her privacy. You don't know me all that well, Fiona, but I never betray a confidence or share a secret. If people ever find out about this place, it won't be from me." She met my gaze with hers. "Good enough. Just so you know, the cavern is strictly a woman's place. Men of our area usually only get to see it once. They respect the custom, and the cavern is held in reverence for the brave men and women over the centuries, many who died keeping the secret." I smiled. "I'll honor my word, but you know it's going to kill me, thinking of all the books I could write about this place and the times it's seen." Ian moved ahead of us, pausing occasionally as he became interested in something. We spoke about him, her hopes for getting him into a top boarding school, and how pleased she was of him. I scowled, and she asked. I gave a shrug. "Different cultures, I guess. In my country, boarding schools are few and far between and mostly military academies. If I ever have children, I'll be wanting them as close to me as possible while they grow." She gave it a minute's careful glance before shifting the topic. "I'm worried about my grandfather. So am I, but we need to face facts here. He's almost 80 and his dream took a lot out of him. Still, it was the completion of a lifelong dream. How many can say they actually sailed through the Northwest Passage? When we get back, there are some things I'd like to show you. I'll make the same request you did of me and ask you to keep it confidential. I think you'll enjoy what you see." She came to knock on my door later that evening, after everyone had settled in. I seated her down in front of my laptop, which was already configured. She didn't take long to start sniffling, and by the time the video finished, she was crying a lot. After settling into my arms and letting out what can only be described as a good cry, she cuddled up and fell silent. I had shown her a few clips from the expedition. A few of the pictures had a lot of impact. She was particularly agitated by one. Her grandfather was at the helm during a gale, singing the Northwest Passage when the winds shook the sails and the rain and snow whipped at him. The sailing ship used for the trip was designed to resemble the ones that were in service at the time. It possessed an engine in addition to sails, but so did Franklin's ships, albeit with diesel instead of steam. The ice had thawed enough due to global warming that the journey was now feasible, and many people had already benefited from the trip. The journey took an additional 10 weeks to complete. Along the way, there were stops to see historical landmarks, one of which being the island where Benjamin Franklin was rumored to be buried, though no one was certain of the actual location. The creators only touched on the failure of the journey very briefly, merely setting the scene, since it had been covered extensively in the past and numerous expeditions had been undertaken to find out the crew's fate. Before I had to go, I stayed for an additional 3 weeks. By then, the Commodore was practically bedridden, so we had a ton of conversations, the majority of which I taped. I got closer to Fiona, but we never went over the line. I had an extremely difficult time leaving, and I was taken aback by how strongly Ian hugged me. We went on numerous lengthy hikes across the moors and cliffs together because he had become my ramble pal. He and Fiona went with me on a couple of quick research trips, and I loved seeing his amazement at what he saw, both in the field and in the museums. Fiona hugged me for a little longer than usual. They made me pledge to visit me as much as possible during the summer, and I made them swear to visit me faithfully. I returned home, but I would frequently find myself observing the boats, especially the sailboats, from my office window as they sailed across the lake. After finishing the book, I acknowledged the Commodore's historical insights in my foreword. My agent nearly fainted, to use the colloquial term, over the video rights battle, and the book went on to become my most successful to date. I had a very pleasant phone discussion with Fiona and Ian, particularly regarding the dedication. It was written for them and read, "This book is dedicated to Fiona and Ian Wallace for their input and support." Fiona could well have been the mother of modern corsairs, and Ian would have been a sailor of note in another time. The tradition lives on. Just as winter was about to end, I received another call from Fiona. Ian took over because she was crying so much that she was unable to speak. "Grandfather's passed. We need you to come home." We spoke on the aircraft at least twice a week, and when the book came out and the dedication was widely known, he became something of a little celebrity. I didn't realize it at the time, but I thought back on his words, "Come home." They greeted me at the airport, giving me hugs as if my life depended on it. We returned to the estate, and in accordance with his last request, I started making calls. He desired a seaside burial with full military honors. In addition, he desired the customary funeral, in which his unembalmed body was placed in a weighted shroud and buried deep. As instructed by him, the morgue had frozen his remains while it awaited further orders. The Admiralty performed admirably, and the Commodore was really a captain. Along with his family, a few fellow veterans, and an honor guard, he was brought to sea on a tiny Navy vessel. He went to the deep in his formal uniform, replete with the medals he'd been awarded, stitched onto a deep blue shroud with yellow stars. There were no reporters or television cameras there, just sailors and relatives. The cloth was weighed down by 3 symbolic cannonballs. The board he was on progressively tilted, and he slipped to his ultimate resting place when the priest ended the service with the customary "We now consign your soul to the deep." As the ship fired its cannons, Fiona and Ian threw a wreath into the water, marking the customary salute to a sailor. His estate could be seen from the water if you looked up from where he was buried, in the bay of his house. The procession made its way to the harbor, with the entire town and a large number of people from the countryside lining the streets. The boats were so crowded that it was nearly possible to walk across them to reach the shore. The Commodore was regarded as a national hero and was much respected. Upon the reading of his will, Fiona and Ian were left in possession of the house, his belongings, and a substantial amount of money, which was not anticipated. All of his naval artifacts was left to Ian, with one exception. A Navy saber that had been used in numerous well-known maritime conflicts and belonged to his great-grandfather, an officer in the middle of the 1802nd. "It's up to me," he said. He wrote me a little note. "I never had a son, but if I had, I'd like to think he would be a man like you, so take it with my gratitude. I would request that on your passing, if you don't have any sons, that Ian get it. It should stay in the family." I objected, but it was ignored. "Keep it. It meant a lot to him for you to have it, and I'm sure it will stay in the family." I took them home with me after making plans to look after his holdings because they appeared to be at loose ends. Weeks passed instead of a few days. Ian needed to have his education addressed, so I enrolled him in a highly regarded private academy. After some time, he became used to the fact that I always seemed to have a lot of lads and girls around on the weekends. His bright red hair, natural good looks, and innate charm had all the girls swarming around him like misplaced dogs, even at 13. It was quite funny at times and frustrating at others. Fiona pouted for a while, but she eventually cheered up with all the children running around. She quickly established acquaintance with the mothers and started taking part in school events. I had a new project in progress that would necessitate some travel. However, it could wait until summer. We became a cohesive family and found semi-domestic happiness. I had to go to all of Ian's school events, and Fiona would clasp my hand in hers as a warning if one of the mothers seemed to be getting too near. We were sitting by the fire, looking out at the frozen lake, a month after I had brought them home. We had the house to ourselves because Ian was spending the night at the movies with some friends. Before speaking, Fiona fidgeted around for a minute. "Miles, I have to know, do you have any feelings for me? Feelings a man has for a woman. Because I find myself falling in love with you, something I never thought I'd experience again. But you've given me no sign, so if you don't, I think Ian and I will go back home." "Where are your passports?" "What? Where are your passports?" "They're in my room, in a dresser drawer. Would you get them, please?" She must have had a million thoughts going through her head, yet she fetched them. "Follow me." I led her into my bedroom and closed my safe behind us. "There. Now you can't leave, at least until you go through the process of getting new ones. I'm holding you and Ian hostage." It required a moment for her smile to appear on her face. She then threw me onto the bed. I didn't anticipate that. Nor did I witness her clothing being undone in record speed. Standing an inch higher than me, I was 6 feet even. Fiona was a Nordic goddess. We were attending one of Ian's school events, which called for a dress code and a suit, and her appearance astounded me. After taking her in, I scowled. "Where are your heels? A dress like that requires heels." I didn't want to. She became quiet. "Didn't want to what?" "Be taller than me. That ship sailed, honey. Now go get your highest pair and let's impress the crap out of some people." Despite being only 3 inches high, her heels gave her a distinct advantage over the other women present. Several guys attempted to win her over, but she would simply grin condescendingly at them until they became uneasy and departed. A woman's expression should have made people think of Valkyrie if she had gotten close to me. When we got in bed, all of that was going through my head. She had stated her fears, and I had smiled back, feeling like I'd taken a pretty good blow to the back of my head. "Believe me, honey, they're all wondering how tall you'd be if you were horizontal." We were exactly the same height, I noticed as she was on top of me, tugging on clothes and kissing me. We made it as though I were a pagan that she was attempting to outfight, or like a Viking shield maiden. By the time we were finished, we were both bruised, exhausted, and I had a good feeling that the scratches would need medical treatment. But as soon as she was full, she became the world's largest kitty, wagging her fingers and drawing patterns all over whatsoever skin she occurred to come into contact with. Wrapped in each other's arms, we passed out. We were still together when we heard the door open, having awoken at the same time and continued to reinforce our compatibility. Ian had arrived home early. Fiona scurried to get her clothes on after jumping off the bed as if it were on fire. I met him in the corridor after changing into jogging trousers and a T-top. "You're home early." "Yeah, Brady got sick and his mom thought it might be a good idea to bring me home. She said she called, but you guys never answered." Brady was the friend he had spent the night with, Mike's younger brother. Probably still on the charger. "So, is it contagious?" Brady asked. She didn't think so, but she thought it better to be safe than sorry. "Where's Mum?" I gestured with my hand. "Oh, she's out and about somewhere. Why don't you go see if she's on the deck?" He smiled and his eyes widened. "The deck? Yeah, I'll do that." Fiona was standing there, looking scared when I turned to face her. She liked dresses, and hers hung dangerously low, making it evident that she wasn't wearing a bra even if she hadn't been carrying one. She began to stammer, so I approached and planted a kiss on her. "Go take a shower and get dressed. I'll talk to him." "What would you say?" "I'd say you're 13 now and I'm pretty sure you know how things work. I'd also tell him that I hold you in the highest regard and won't tolerate any disrespect." He'll either accept it or he won't, but you saw the grin. I think he's on board. As I stepped outside onto the terrace, she vanished into her room. Ian turned and grinned as he sat there, taking in the boats. So, you and Mum? Yes, me and your mum. Will that be a problem for you? He was unable to hide his smile. Not if it works out the way I think it will. It'll cost you, though. Mum and I want a sailboat. They had been discussing it in broad strokes. I believe that a portion of it served as a gauge for how much I wanted them to stay. We'll have lunch at the club and I'll put out some feelers. He gave a whoop and started to play the hornpipe, which he had learned from the Commodore. Ian was unaware that he had also instructed me. As we executed our high kicks with our arms raised over our hips, Fiona appeared, using her phone to record the dance. We stood at attention at the conclusion and gave a superb salute without missing a beat. We gave her as big of an embrace as we could, and she was smiling and crying at the same time. Ian lost control when we let go of each other and threw ourselves onto the patio furniture. Mum, duh, Miles is going to buy us a sailboat. I gently corrected. I said we'd look at sailboats. We'll see. Fiona's expression became joyful. You'll learn, my darling boy, that when a man tells his woman and his child will see, it means it's practically a done deal. I felt a surge of pleasure that felt like lightning. We had Sunday brunch at the yacht club the following day. Even though I wasn't a member, I knew a lot of them, so it was simple to get an invitation, especially once I revealed that I was trying to get a boat. Ian was standing erect next to Fiona, who, for want of a better word, looked regal. I felt like I would fade into the background if we were together, but I was okay with that. When the governor learned who Fiona was, he insisted that we sit at the governor's table. Your grandfather was well liked, Miss Wallace. He was and is sorely missed. After she thanked him, they got to talking about her grandfather's final expedition, which involved crossing the Northwest Passage. Grinning, I considered the documentary that was scheduled to be released the next month. Her granddad figured heavily in it. He was shown in the last scene standing at the helm in the gale, the wind whipping his long white hair and beard. Before a version created especially for the movie superimposed his remarks, you could hardly make out what he was saying. It was performed by the well-known Irish band Fiddler's Green. We requested submissions from other ensembles, and I, the producer, thought theirs was the finest. In the last scene, he was seen fighting the helm from behind to keep her straight and on course. The screen turned to dark, revealing his name and the date of his death, as the vocals surged fiercely. We strolled the port after lunch while he showed us a number of boats that were for sale. Fiona was clearly not impressed. He then showed her a handful that were available for purchase both locally and throughout the southeast when we entered his office. After demonstrating one to her, he began to flip past it. This one, although I wasn't a boat person, the governor later informed me that the 38-footer had impeccable lines and was the best of the lot. In addition, the couch could be made into a bed, and it included a cabin. I was anticipating something a little more modest, but even though I owned the bank, Fiona appeared to have the keys to the safe. I wrote a check once we took a look at it. By then, summer was well underway, and we found ourselves on the water far too much. Electric engines might be employed to lift the sails, but they were rarely used. I learned to sail very well in fair weather, but Fiona or Ian took over the helm when things went choppy. One of my favorite recollections of being out alone with Fiona is making love on a boat while a rainstorm was raging. We were safe because we were anchored in a protected harbor. Later on, I pondered whether the explosions I had heard that evening originated in the bedroom or in the storm. That was the night I happened to give her a ring. After a moment, she turned pale, and the explosions began. Prior to that, we traveled to Canada for the documentary's world debut. The majority of the actors, crew, and their families attended the private showing, along with a select few invited guests. I had no idea there would be more than 400 attendees. We were all given a tiny book before the movie began, which detailed the journey and listed every person who had contributed to the project, from the crew to all the technical personnel. The cover featured the Commodore. There was also a poster encouraging people to stand final watch for Captain Wallace at the end of the movie with the cast and crew if they enjoyed the movie. I had purposefully kept Fiona and Ian in the dark about the movie because I wanted their sincere opinion. That might have been an error. She became quieter and more motionless as the movie went on, gripping our hands so tightly that I thought my blood would stop flowing. She broke down in sobbing as the last credits rolled. The audience fell silent, and then a guy rose to his feet and began to sing in a clear, high tenor. Others stood up in groups of 2 or 3, and those who could sing the words joined in. The audience's veterans of all branches of the armed forces saluted and stood at attention until the very conclusion. As I was supporting Fiona, I noticed Ian was standing erect and maintaining his composure while shedding tears. As the song came to a conclusion, the cameras focused in on him. Everyone in the cinema walked past Fiona and Ian as the lights came up, giving them hugs, back pats, and condolences. She gave one tiny woman, who had to be in her 90s, a hug and stepped back, and she really got to her. Old sea dogs never die, honey, they just go on a new voyage. You'll see him one day, standing at the helm, waiting to welcome you aboard. As a memorial to Fiona and Ian, the production company had set up cameras and recording equipment. Later, they requested permission to post it on YouTube, partly as a tribute and partly to promote the movie. When it first came out, footage of people standing and singing along in theaters was aired by the BBC and the majority of American broadcasters. When it was revealed that Nathan Rogers was on the crew, it became much more significant in Canada. Northwest Passage, written by his father Stan, became so well known in Canada that it was regarded as a second national anthem. He participated in a brief portion of the journey and continues to discuss it during his live performances. He sang classic sea shanties while sitting with many of the crew during one particular part. I was billed as the biographer for a Channel 4 documentary about Captain Wallace. In the movie, I had a number of talks that I had carefully screened before granting permission. A year later, there was a campaign to have his likeness on a stamp. She had just taken off her clothes when she dozed off when we eventually returned to our suite. After we had sat for a while, I asked Ian what he thought. I think I wish I had been with him. Because he lived in the States, I didn't get to spend nearly enough time with him as I would have liked, but when I was around him, I barely left his side. He was quite a man, wasn't he? He's the stuff legends are made of, son. You have a great legacy ahead of you. The following morning, I discovered Fiona drinking tea on the patio before the rest of us. Are you all right? She gave a weak smile. Yes, just a bit overwhelmed. It seems I didn't mourn him nearly enough. My father was absent often, and he's the man I consider my true parent. She then cuddled up on my lap. I need to thank you. You never said, but the documentary crew let me know you financed the expedition, saying you wanted it filmed, and most are firmly convinced it was just to give grandfather his dream. Words can't express my gratitude. I did it because I could, and because I knew how much it meant to him. He'd been trying to organize it for years. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. You thought enough of him to spend $12 million on his dream. I'll never forget. The fact that she knew how much I spent bothered me a lot. I could definitely afford it, and the forecasted figures showed that I would profit handsomely. To be honest, though, I would have gone ahead and done it even if it had failed. Before going back home, we stayed at the estate for 3 weeks. Ian reverted to the bliss of his youth, complete with devoted parents and a promising future. He wouldn't have to work if he didn't want to because of my wealth, but I was certain he would pursue a career of some type. He simply wasn't meant to stay idle. When she got the ring, the topic of money was finally brought up. I don't want your money. I've got my own income, so I'll never be destitute. I simply smiled. Don't want my money, honey. Well, I'm afraid I'll have to invoke the clause. What in bloody hell does that mean? It stands for too bad. You'll get the money whether you want it or not, and then it goes to Ian. The subject is not up for discussion. When I left, she was still attempting to make noises. Ian and Fiona were adored by my parents and siblings. Mom started giving them hints once they got to know one another. Vi and I had discussed it. At 39 years old and her 36 years old, we both agreed that it would be best if we were childless. Her physicians advised her not to have any more children because she had a rough birth with Ian and warned that it would be extremely risky. She shed a few tears about it. I always wanted a daughter, and I would have loved one with you. Before I gave her an option, I waited a year. Meanwhile, we tied the knot 2 times, once in Scotland and once in the United States. I had no issue because it was essential to her. After a span of 3 days, she vanished briefly and reappeared with an enormous smile. That evening, she showed me a photo that was shot in the hidden cave, in which her name and mine were placed next to her grandfather's and grandmother's. You're mine for life now, my darling. You didn't need it carved in stone for that to come true, but I admit it's a nice touch. My next book was unlike anything I had ever read before. It was a biography written by Captain Sir Winston Stone Wallace. Yes, the Commodore belonged to the Scottish nobility as a lord. He once told me about it and laughed. Back when my ancestors ascended, you could practically qualify for a lordship just for putting your pants on correctly and having a few pounds to donate to whatever war was raging at the time. Still, to their credit, my forebears were bonny scrappers. Despite the book's short length, I believed I had covered all the major topics. In the UK, it sold considerably better and performed fairly well. In Canada than the home market, but the message was what mattered to me, not the profit. I gave it to Ian's mom and myself. To my son, Ian Wallace Mawson, and his mother, the love of my life, Fiona Wallace Mawson, honorable descendants of a proud and noble line. Soon after the wedding, Ian had asked if I would adopt him so that we would all have the same name. My response startled him. I need you to understand nothing would make me prouder, but I have to remind you that you're the last of the Wallace line. If you take mine, the line ceases to exist. If you still want to, we'll start the paperwork tomorrow. Fiona gave me a tight hug and her highly developed mind solved the problem. Since I married you, my name is Fiona Wallace Mawson. I've decided to have my name legally changed to Wallace Mawson to honor my grandfather. Ian could do the same. We actually did just that, even though he goes by Mawson at school. The yacht club put together a Christmas flotilla that winter. All participating boats were required to have functional holiday lights. You had to pay a charge to participate, but you didn't need to be a member to support one of their causes. Fi and Ian were really into it. There was a full-sized Christmas tree at the top, and lights were even strung up the mast. The sale stayed for all because we were going to be using the motor. Subsequently, they were compelled to assist others, Darla included. My family had urged that we join the club, so we ran into each other at events. She had joined with her husband, who, although a lawyer, seemed like a good man and had taken to sailing. On their 3rd anniversary, he gifted her a brand new boat that was nearly identical to ours. Darla had recently given birth to a son, and they had been married for 4 years. Although she was a little older than a child, her health was constantly watched, and she gave birth to a healthy young boy. Vi and Ian were helping because she was still recovering after giving birth. Before Darla persuaded her to join them for a cup of coffee, they were a little aloof at first. We were just young and dumb, well, me at least, and when Miles got successful, I let it go to my head. Do I wish I hadn't done it? You bet, for a very long time, before I finally realized I couldn't go back in time and had to look to the future. I dated some pretty bad losers for a while and had just about given up when I met Rick. Look, you know who I am, I know who you are. I know he met you years after we split, so you aren't a replacement. You're his wife now, by all accounts. I told him everything about our breakup, and he told me that a foolish young girl's acts shouldn't represent a mature woman, and that we wouldn't be dating if he didn't feel he could trust me. After that, I couldn't get his ring on my finger quickly enough, and I'm happy today. I'm sure you are too. She then burst out laughing. Is he still like a kid in a candy shop in the sack? Worse. You love it, though. Am I right? Very much. He keeps everything fresh and I have no idea from one day to the next what he's up to. It gives me a lot to look forward to. So then, I'm his past. You're his future. We never intersected. Think you might be interested in being friends. Vi gave her a hug. I see definite possibilities. It was 15 minutes before Darla's knock on our door when she subsequently informed me about it. You sure you don't mind? It'll only be for a few hours and I can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to this. A chance to get to talk to grown-ups without keeping one ear open for his crying will be heaven. Oh, hi, Miles. I was just leaving. She kissed Vi on the cheek, thrust the baby carrier into my hands, and left. I turned to face the slumbering baby. What was that all about? She smiled. Oh, I didn't tell you. We're babysitting so Darla and hubby can attend his company Christmas party. They'll be back by midnight at the latest. Give him to me. As it was an order, I followed it. Ian and I smiled while she rocked the youngster and spoke softly to him. Then she forced me to feed him and made Ian hold him while she warmed a bottle. Practice for our grandchildren and learn from this. It was enjoyable, but once he finished, I gave him to Fi, who walked him while massaging his back till he burped and then wrinkled her nose. Typical. What goes in, comes out. Grab the diaper bag, love. After taking a sniff, Ian ran off. Fi only grinned as she changed him and instructed me to dispose of the used diaper, even though it smelled a little like poisonous garbage. Fi giggled as I delicately held it by one corner all the way to the trash. When they returned a few hours later, Darla was giggling uncontrollably. After glancing at me, Fi smiled and motioned for me to go prepare coffee. Rick trailed me and turned around to see them sitting together on the sofa, grinning and whispering to each other. Wonder what they're talking about. You're a lawyer, right? How long you been married? Surely by now you know the first thing married women talk about is their husbands, followed by their children. When those are exhausted, they turn to the next thing that's always on their mind. Bonding. I have memories of that giggle Darla uses. You're getting laid tonight. He seemed a little surprised, but then he smiled. She just got cleared to resume her wifely duties as she puts it. I only hope Junior stays asleep long enough to let us get reacquainted. I couldn't help but smile. Leave him here. Darla brought a bag with enough formula and diapers to last a month. I'd be in the dark here, but Fi is an excellent mother and she'd kill for the chance to keep him. Really? Yes, counselor, really. Go home and try to break the bed. The women seemed to be talking about the same thing, and after giving her son around 27 kisses, she gave us both a kiss and muttered something. I'd never admit it to Rick, but I think you traded up. All the way to the car, he was grabbing her. Due to her continual need to check on the baby, I doubt Fi slept all that much. Once, when I stood up, I saw her staring down at him, scratching her cheek, and her eyes full of tears. It's time to start the conversation. When they returned the following morning, Darla appeared a little more worn out and had small bites evident beneath her blouse. Rick was worn out and had a significant cut on his neck. No matter how far behind you fall, I surmised, you may almost catch up in a single evening. For several days, Fi wandered around until the Christmas flotilla diverted his attention. A significant amount of money was raised to improve Christmas for numerous underprivileged families. We were able to enjoy ourselves. Now that Ian was 15, they went on a date. Her appearance is something I don't recall seeing in a 15-year-old. It was kind of unbelievable how she filled out the sweater. Though they did spend most of the time cuddled up beneath a blanket, necking when they thought we were not looking, she was a wonderful kid all the same. Once we came home, she appeared to be depressed. With orders not to leave the room, we left the young couple in front of the big fireplace and withdrew to the den. He's growing up so fast. Soon he'll be off to uni and we'll have an empty nest. I smiled. I've been meaning to talk to you about that. I know we decided to forego having children naturally, but they don't have to be homemade. There's a lot of kids out there that need a loving home. I'd like a daughter if we decide to adopt. I don't think a boy could measure up after Ian. Tears sparkled in her eyes. If we got a boy, you'd love him every bit as deeply as you do Ian. But I like your idea of a little girl. Are you sure? How young should we go? I'm fine with a newborn or even a teen, but I'd like to keep them a little longer. Do you think? I touched her lips with my fingertips. I think I should have brought this up sooner. I vote for the smaller the better. I've even put some feelers out. We'll look into it after the holidays. It was, in my opinion, one of the best holidays ever. Ian then approached us, eager to speak. I've thought about this a lot. I want to follow in the footsteps of my grandfather and become a naval man. I'd like to go into the Royal Naval College at Dartmouth as soon as I get an undergraduate degree. To do that, I have to go to school there, so I guess what I'm trying to ask is if you'll send me to boarding school so I can be in place to proceed. This is really what you want. I've thought about it a lot. This is really what I want. I really don't want to go to boarding school, but I see no option. Silently sobbing, Fi lamented her nest becoming empty too soon and said, "Let me see if I can't work something out." We were going to do the right thing, no question about it. A return to Scotland was the proper course of action. I could work anywhere as long as I had a laptop and a quiet place to work. I wasn't tied to any particular career. Many tears were shed when we went over for a goodbye meal with my parents. Subsequently, a niece inquired as to if I was abandoning Brenda. Fi would chuckle about it, stroking beneath her chin and whispering to her, but she had instantly dethroned me as the one she loved the most. The woman devoured it. Ian was more affectionate than I was, and we debated renaming her Sea Dog because of her apparent affinity for the boat. For as long as we were outside, she would stand on the bow with the spray drenching her and a canine smile rictus on her lips. Sorry, Chrissy, but she's going with us. Despite my explanation that we would be spending most of our summers here, there was a major farewell celebration for us at the yacht club. Fi and Darlene had become close friends, and when they said farewell, they were crying all over one another. We shut down our lake cottage 2 days following the celebration and dove into the pond. Ian was accepted to an elite school where he could continue to live at home, and the attractive young ladies quickly fell in love with the well-built, tan teen. Some parents encouraged their daughters to marry him in the hopes of having a happy marriage. Fi chuckled at my indignation. He and the 3 girls made peace with it and proudly displayed their friendship in front of their parents, saying, "I'm afraid it's a worldwide habit. Arranged marriage in one form or another still exists. I guess some customs never die." I worked, publishing a novel and hatching a second. I had been addicted to writing every other book with a nautical subject that was highly received by readers. My book about profiteering and piracy along the South American coast gave me the appetite for it. I was once compared to a more sophisticated Clive Cussler by a critic, which was both hilarious and absolutely untrue. I had met Mr. Cussler, and his passion for the ocean was much beyond my imagination. He asked me to join him on a historical study excursion through his foundation since we clicked so well. He had found and raised other shipwrecks, and I could only imagine one man having the same level of knowledge. He would have been adored by the Commodore. I believe he regarded the raising of the Hunley, the first Confederate submarine, as his greatest accomplishment. I was unable to go due to a deadline, but a few months later, I came across a story about his discovery and retrieval of 4 ancient cannons that were utilized in the 1812 defense of New Orleans. I sent a beautiful wreath when he passed away and really considered writing a book based on some of his adventures, but ultimately decided to put it on hold until after some more time had passed. While in the States, we had been considering adoption, and now we were going through the same procedure again. Just as I was starting to lose hope in the entire procedure, Vi arrived home from town pulling 2 automobiles. 3 persons, wearing outfits that said government official in every language possible, climbed out of one, while 2 more well-dressed women emerged from the other, unlocking the rear doors and removing 2 parcels. I'd come out of the office and her smile would have powered half of Scotland, and the bundles turned out to be twin girls, barely older than 2. They looked confused and scared and not at all happy. Vi ushered everyone in the drawing room, a place we rarely used, more to impress them than to be comfortable. "Ah, there he is. Allow me to present you to Miles, my spouse. Honey, these precious darlings are Cara and Florence," Vi said, cradling the 2 girls in her lap as she gave them a hug. I got everyone's names and shook hands, still not sure what was going on. They are alone in the world after their parents were involved in a terrible tragedy. I want to make that correction. After assisting us with a plethora of paperwork for 3 hours, the woman in charge shook my hands and said, "Congratulations. For now, you are a temporary father. We have given you custody of these daughters with the potential of complete adoption down the road. We'll stop over frequently to make sure they're receiving the attention they need. I'm confident that these kids will have a wonderful day in the future. You and Lady Fiona enjoy great reputations in the town, but etiquette needs to be observed. Although you will be scrutinized closely, we are confident that you are capable of meeting the challenge. I wish you luck in everything." Vi smiled and said, "Congratulations, honey, it's a girl, or in this case girls," before they disappeared. "I know this is sudden and a bit of a shock, but it was an opportunity I seized," she said with a serious expression. They had no close family, were set to enter foster care, and their parents had perished in a boating accident. I went straight to their office after hearing the news. I did something with my ladyship status other than volunteer work for the first time in my life. Don't be furious, please. By this point, Fiona was cradling Florence while tears streamed down her cheeks, and I was holding Kara, gently rocking her as I felt the fear leave her little body. Though abrupt, this is flawless. So, old girl, get over it. It will be a lengthy journey. The girls had fallen asleep by now, so we carefully laid them down, and she collapsed into my arms, happy tears streaming down her cheeks. It took them 6 months to realize he was their big brother. They would be waiting at the door when he got home from class and would be all over each other for 15 or 20 minutes. They couldn't quite enunciate brother, so it became Bubby. Ian came home and heard the story. By then the girls were up, wandering around the room, and soon they were quite taken by him, wanting to follow him wherever he went in the house. Before Kara screamed into my office a year later, Spider-Man. The big spider was tiny, but it was in their toy box and had to go. Fiona laughed as I picked it up and carried it outside. Talking to the girls as I went, I explained that spiders had a purpose in life and that we shouldn't hurt them. They calmed down, but they wouldn't come near it. After they were back in their playroom, Fiona approached me and said, "I love seeing you smile when they call you Da." Florence was right behind her, her own eyes enormous, grasping my hand. Within 2 months, they were referring to you as Mummy. Together with me, it took 5. Tells me my position. Kara likes your lap when given the option, as you are aware. She'll be the set's daddy's girl. Except when she's afraid, Florence seems to favor me. Then, Vanquisher of Spiders, it's all up to you. They formally became Florence and Kara Wallace Malson over a year after we got them. After graduating, Ian enrolled in the engineering program at the University of Edinburgh, which was ranked 16th in the world, making his admission easier than I had thought. Despite this, Ian was a legacy from 2.5 centuries ago, and he received high marks for his sustainable energy coursework. During his time there, he converted almost every building on the estate to solar and wind power, which was always available because he lived by the sea. I gave him the sword the Commodore had given me all those years ago, and he walked across the stage as a commissioned officer, carrying it. It got pretty emotional. He graduated with honors and almost immediately entered the Royal Naval College. Once again, he was a legacy. The course normally took 39 weeks to complete, but he went for some advanced classes that put it to 50. That is too much for me to handle. You are able and willing to. To continue the legacy, it is worthy to be on your side. You didn't believe I could retain it, did you, the Commodore? He entrusted it to me, knowing that I would turn it over at this very moment. The history will weigh on you, and I have no doubt that it will become even more of a burden when the time comes to pass it on to your son and daughter. The brilliantly polished hilt sparkled in the sunlight. He took a brief vacation before starting his first posting, which involved installing solar panels and small wind turbines on a ship patrolling the North Sea. His designs proved so successful that he was transferred from ship to ship, installing systems. The girls, who were now 8 years old, clung to his knees when it was time for them to report for service. He had given them postcards and small gifts from far-off locations, and they would write him lengthy letters in which they would describe in detail everything that had transpired since their previous correspondence. Was I ever an idiot? Between teenage angst, periods, boyfriends, dates that kept me up till they came home, driver's licenses, and the whole thing, I really assumed that things would settle down a bit when they hit their teens. Then there would come the wonderful moments. The cuddles, the excursions, the adventures, made it all worthwhile. We took my mother home for a visit when her father passed away suddenly. Vi and I enjoyed the freedom of our old lake house for about a week, but by the time the girls returned, I bet they thought we were going to kill them with kisses and hugs. She has returned to the States 4 times in the last 6 years for significant family events, most notably the marriages of her grandchildren. The only time the veneer faltered was when Mom and the girls discovered a woman abusing a small child. Her heritage came roaring back and the woman had no counter for redneck foo. Mom literally kicked her ass and it took the girls and 2 constables to get her off the woman. She was charged with assault and public disruption, whatever that meant. The woman was charged with child abuse and turned around and sued Mom for damages. Things work differently in Scotland. So at first Mom laughed and told her to go ahead, since she had nothing of value to take away. Eventually I was able to get the woman to settle out of court for a small amount, which she spent at the pub and other places right away. They seized her child, and Fiona took over, so for around 18 months the girls had a little sister while her mother attended seminars on alcohol addiction, anger management, responsible behavior, and appropriate parenting practices. After completing the courses, her mother was able to reclaim Alicia. We were in the Land Rover the moment we felt Alicia really didn't want to go back, but we had no choice. Both my mother and Fiona had instilled in her the importance of calling immediately if things went back to normal. 3 months later, she called Mom, sniffling. Her mother had flown into a drunken rage and beaten her pretty badly, and she was hiding at a friend's house, leaving after she passed out. After Alicia's mother was arrested by emergency services after they saw her, we were able to adopt her because we were her foster parents of record. She left when she went off to university, having gone through the legal system to have her name changed to Alicia Agnes Wallace Malson, even though her mother had not allowed it. Once she reached legal age, she was unable to stop it. With 2 women, 2 teens, and a preteen living in the house, it was an estrogen-driven environment, so I made the decision to spend as much time as I could in my office. However, that plan never worked, as there was always some issue requiring my presence, and the only family member who wasn't demanding was my smooth collie, Angus. The strong sea dog, Brenda, went away at the age of 13, which was a good age for her breed. Ian was most disappointed because she had become his dog. We purchased her a nice stone and buried her high above the sea, where the salt wind would always meet her face. We looked at several pounds and top breeders in the area for 6 months before deciding to adopt another dog. The girls fell in love with Highland Terriers and got one each. Ian bonded immediately with a deerhound he found at a pound. I found Angus at another shelter. He was 3/4 smooth collie out of a registered dog by a half mutt, half collie, and as such was ruined for the breeder, so he donated the litter to the shelter. Fiona found a female golden retriever she had to have, so there was always a dog around. With Fiona's skill as a trainer, she soon had the pack in tip-top shape. The dogs all needed a lot of exercise, so once a week and every weekend found us on the trails as the dogs ran back and forth, aside from the times the kids would spend with them. Angus was content to live in my office. The terriers would sleep with the girls if we'd let them. The deerhound preferred to sleep outside in his box, even in bad weather, and the retriever slept at the foot of our bed. Stag, the deerhound, always alerted everyone to our presence, so nobody ever sneaked up on us. The pack gained 2 more members when Alicia and Mom arrived. Alicia received a border collie, and Mom received what can only be described as a mutt. He was enormous, and the deerhound acknowledged him as the pack leader. God help you if he believed you were about to hurt Mom. After completing the equivalent of high school in Scotland, Cara and Florence decided to attend different institutions. Cara chose St. Andrews, while Florence chose Aberdeen, where she planned to pursue a medical degree. When Alicia's time to go came about 5 years later, she shocked us all by selecting Oxford. I suppose Fiona contained herself for Alicia, but once Alicia went, Fi seemed to go crazy. She started having epic temper tantrums and acting violently a few times. I started noticing strange behavioral traits in Fiona right before Alicia departed. I think it was partly brought on by Mom's death. She passed away peacefully, in her sleep, at 76. Vi discovered her when she didn't come down for breakfast, and we took her ashes home, laying them beside Dad. Then we flew back and buried the small portion we kept in the family plot, where her wish to have a small piece of her always be with us gave Fiona great satisfaction. I tried talking to her and trying to reason with her, but as the months passed, it got worse. I finally had enough when she got into a rage and I caught her with a shotgun. I tried one last time to convince her to see a doctor, but she looked at me with a venomous expression in her eyes and said, "I'm going to the cavern tomorrow to gouge out your name. I want to stop interacting with you." Despite my heartbreak, I trusted her and left the following day. After 2 days, Fiona called and berated me for not being at home, insisting that I come back right away. Not going to occur. I refused to go to sleep with one eye open, waiting for you to lose it, even if I love you more than words can say. Not if, but when you consent to have a physical examination and attend a few therapy sessions. I'll board the first flight back. I'm happy where I am for the time being. When I disconnected, she was yelling at me. I called each child separately, explaining the situation. They had all seen their mother's changes but had no idea it had gotten so bad. They deputized Florence, a doctor, to go see Fiona and see if she could gain some understanding of what was going on. I called the kids to let them know what was going on, and they in turn told me what was going on back home. So I spent a few days at the lake house before buying an Indian chief setup for touring and hitting the road. Ian took emergency leave, which the girls met him at the airport. Florence discovered her unconscious on the bedroom floor, clutching our wedding photo. My face was mutilated, and a large knife lay next to her. She called emergency services, who transported her to a nearby hospital before moving her to a larger facility, where all the kids left what they were doing to gather at the hospital. I was returning on the following plane when Cara called to tell me she was in the hospital. I spoke with the specialists extensively, and it appeared that my beautiful wife had a number of problems that were all brought on by menopause. She has a severe hormonal imbalance, and she needs thyroid surgery as soon as can be scheduled, I said. Although it's still in its early stages, her cancer will likely only require a few lumps to be removed, followed by strict observation. According to what your daughter told us, she might be a threat to herself and others, so we're also proposing severe therapy. I was reeling. When I awoke, she was sedated, and I spent 20 hours with her before Cara and Florence took over. I was given a suite and napped for 7 hours. When I came back, Ian was there with Alicia. They're going to bring her out of sedation, and they want us there when she wakes. She opened her eyes slowly, whimpering, and stretched out her arms to greet me. The children gathered around, trying to touch her as much as they could, and I cradled her. Fiona underwent thyroid surgery, obtained the necessary vitamins to maintain hormone balance, and started therapy. Cara was a little upset with me for leaving, but her mother quickly set her straight. Baby, I lost all control. At the very end, I thought very seriously about killing your father there. It was the necessary shock for me, and he was right to go. We were all likely spared by his departure. A few months later, she underwent the cancer surgery and is now tested every 6 months like clockwork, but no new symptoms have appeared. The therapy was really beneficial, and she seemed to require my companionship, so I went with her virtually every time. The years passed. Ian married a Spanish woman he'd met while stationed there, attached to the embassy. It would appear his days at sea were over. She was relieved he was back on land. There had been a minor flare-up in Africa, and he was assigned to a smaller ship to patrol the border. They were attacked by what turned out to be pirates, who learned very quickly that attacking an unarmed freighter was one thing, and fighting someone with superior firepower, and being more than happy to use it, was quite another. The pirates blew the pirate ship out of the water, literally, leaving only one survivor amongst the 26 on board. The man gave up names, and all of a sudden the little country was facing the full fury of the British government, to the extent that they were informed as far as Britain was concerned, they were at war. Ian conducted the interrogation, and when the man admitted they were state-sponsored, having to give 50% of their gains to the government, things got interesting. A number of years after the country had become a thorn in the side of many other countries, the U.S. offered support, escorting freighters past the coast. 2 raids were attempted and both were dealt with extreme force. They didn't offer to check for survivors. The branches of the Special Forces came together and launched several successful raids on pirate strongholds, totally destroying 3 and then burning any ships in harbor. A plot to invade was being prepared, and protests broke out in the bigger cities, demanding changes to the administration. The country collapsed under pressure from both the outside and the inside, and the new dictatorship was installed right away under the supervision of an international committee. The Commodore would have been very proud of his grandson as my family watched Ian receive his medals, his arm still in a sling, and learned that he had been assigned as military liaison to the committee in recognition of his part in overthrowing the dictatorship. When he foiled an attempt to assignation on both the U.S. and British ambassadors, he was promoted and given medals from both countries. There was a U.S. captain who did as much as Ian, and they received their medals together and became lifelong friends. After the incident, he was posted to Spain at the ambassador's request, and Ian complied. It was at the ball hosted by the embassy that he met his wife, who was also a member of the minor royalty, that they struck up a conversation, and their dinner date soon developed into a quiet breakfast. When he proposed, he took her to the estate, where she became friendly with all the girls. Using an obscure statute that permitted him to preside at weddings, the ambassador, a retired naval officer himself, performed the service. A Spanish bishop was present merely to make sure things were legitimate in her father's eyes. They considered Ian one of their own, and the chance to show off a couple from 2 separate royal houses made it extra special. They spent their honeymoon at the lake house, and the yacht club threw a reception for them. She took all the female relatives her age and younger on a shopping spree in New York, and by the time it was over, they would have killed for her. He took her to meet my side of the family, and though at first she wasn't sure how to take them, they got along beautifully. When the boys were old enough, we would take them for a few weeks each summer, and they loved spending time with their cousins. I'm sure Conchita adored having Ian home all the time. Cara received her degree but doesn't use it. She spends her time chasing her 3 kids. Florence works at the local hospital, and we worry she's married to her career, though she has started bringing this extremely cute nurse along to family meals. I think that Alicia's statement that if they ever got together, he would have to move to Scotland has kind of put an end to their relationship. She surprised us by moving to the States to pursue her postgraduate degree, and although she lives in the lake house, she travels home frequently. I'm in my 70s and still write. Most of my books sell well, though I don't have the same level of popularity as I once did. My grandchildren beg me to tell them stories, and I published 2 children's books, one for young readers and the other for under 10s, both of which performed rather well. My comment: did you like this soft ending in the end? Or you prefer more wild ones? Comment what you feel down below, and I hope that other people will share their relationships with us.